Hey guys, welcome to Full Stop Reviews. I'm your host, Matt Keim, and today we will be talking about my top 10 movies of the year 2020. Now, before we get too far into it, just remember to give a like, comment, subscribe, hit that little button. You know what to do from there. So, as we all know, the year 2020 was messed up for, well, you know. And as one of the side effects, a lot of movies found their release dates being pushed back. And so you have movies that were eligible for Oscars, for example, that were being released as late February and early March of this year. And you don't typically see that. Sometimes with Oscar eligible movies, sometimes they will get released limited late December, wide release in January. Sometimes they'll get limited releases in January. But this year, because so many movies and their releases were delayed or just canceled altogether, the Oscars had to be a little bit more flexible. So that's how I'm going to structure this list. So basically, my criteria for this list is if it was eligible for an Oscar, it's eligible for this list. A quick content warning: not every single one of these movies has easy subject matter to process. And there are subjects such as sexual assault, suicide, racial violence, mental illness, and a few others that I may be forgetting right now. So if any of those topics bothers you, I would suggest clicking away or just doing whatever you gotta do to take care of yourself, but just know that I will be talking about some of those in this video. One last disclaimer, and this one's a little bit more of a cheerful one, is that I do need to stress that this is my personal list. This is not an objective list of the objective best movies of the year. This is one idiot with a camera talking about movies for 15 minutes, so just take that for what it's worth. I haven't seen every single movie released this year. There are still many movies I still personally want to see. And so if a movie you like is not on this list, there's a very good chance that I either A, haven't seen it, or just B, liked the other movies more. It doesn't mean I thought the movie was bad by any stretch of the imagination. With the little busy work out of the way, let's get into the list. Number 10. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, written and directed by Eliza Hittman and starring Sydney Flanagan and Talia Ryder. Sydney Flanagan plays a teenage girl who finds herself with an unwanted pregnancy, and so she and her friend have to travel over to New York City because they can't get an abortion without parental consent in their town in Pennsylvania, and so they find themselves needing to cross state lines to do it. This is a very, very quiet movie in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of dialogue. I'd say probably around only half the movie actually contains dialogue. So much of this movie is told through camera movements, just subtle glances between characters, physical actions. This movie really focuses on showing instead of telling, and that's something I really appreciate. It takes a very, very grounded approach to the subject matter. Another thing adding to this element is the fact that the movie was shot on 16mm film. It gives the entire thing kind of like a documentary realism that something like this might not otherwise have had. Sydney Flanagan's performance is phenomenal in this movie. They are a first-time actor. This was their debut film, and that's astounding to me because there are some scenes in this movie that just blow you away. Now, there's a scene about 60 minutes into this movie where the girls have reached the abortion clinic, and she's sitting down and filling out a questionnaire with one of the doctors. And I won't say what happens in that scene, but it is one of the most captivating scenes out of any movie I saw in the past year. And it's a very simply done scene. It's just focused on Sydney Flanagan's performance. It's just a shot and a reverse shot, and the shots just linger. And it gets to a point where the scene starts getting really uncomfortable, and you want the scene to cut away, but Eliza Hittman very wisely doesn't. It's a very, very emotionally gripping film. I highly recommend this movie. Number 9 is the sci-fi indie film Vast of Night. I think one of the most underrated films of the year. You could make the argument that because its initial release happened in 2019, it kind of toes the line between should this have been on last year's category or not, but it's my list, not yours. Directed by newcomer Andrew Patterson and starring Jake Horowitz and Sierra McCormick, this film is a fun little twist on the UFO sci-fi subgenre. It's kind of presented like a feature film version of a Twilight Zone episode, to the point where even the intro of the movie has this pseudo Twilight Zone-y type intro, and there's kind of an overlay where you're zooming into an old-fashioned TV. So the entire thing is deliberately trying to evoke the Twilight Zone. And as somebody who grew up watching that series, it just really just tickled that part of me. It stars Jake Horowitz and Sierra McCormick as Everett and Faye, respectively, a pair of teenagers who work at a radio station, mostly for the night shift. While they're running a show during the span of a night, they find some mysterious recordings that may or may not have come from UFOs, and they just go into the rabbit hole from there. I won't spoil what happens from there, but it's a wonderful, fast-paced movie that switches over from sci-fi to almost kind of like a journalistic procedural film, and so it has kind of multiple elements. Now, one of the more impressive things about this movie is that it was shot for less than $1 million, and you would never know that looking at this movie because they successfully recreate this small New Mexico town. The production value far exceeds its budget, and it's a hell of an accomplishment because it's very, very immersive. And some of the most gripping scenes in this movie happen when Everett and Faye are just in the radio station just listening to people talk. And it's a very, very simple movie with a very, very simple premise. This movie has a very, very frenetic pace, and so sometimes the characters get a little bit lost in it. And that sounds like a bigger deal than it actually is. It's a really, really wonderful movie. It's a hell of a debut film, and it's on Amazon Prime. Everybody should see this movie, and especially if you like The Twilight Zone, and that's my number 9 film. Now, my number 8 movie is the film Promising Young Woman. This is one of those movies that deals with some of those topics that I mentioned, so if you're not comfortable with that, feel free to skip on to the next one. I'll include time codes for each numbered film. This movie was directed by Emerald Fennell and stars Carey Mulligan and Bo Burnham. Carey Mulligan stars as a self-destructive woman who is living out her own trauma and is dealing with the aftermath of her friend's sexual assault and subsequent suicide. This is a much darker film than I anticipated going in because it kind of seemed like it'd be kind of like a fun revenge thriller, and it's kind of an anti-revenge movie. This is not an easy movie to watch, and I was kind of caught off guard by just how dark it goes, and it fucking goes places. That's not a bad thing. One of the clever things that this movie does is it casts people like Bo Burnham and other friendly comedic faces, people who we normally know as sympathetic characters, as people who are just really just have this veneer of niceness, and most of them even describe themselves as nice guys, and there's just a very, very dark side to it, and I think that was a brilliant casting choice. It highlights the movie's message that it's not just the obvious ones, you know? Bo Burnham's performance is great, and there's a lot of heartbreaking things in this movie, and the directing in this movie is really, really great. It's kind of got this neon cotton candy vibe to it, and it's almost like neon 80s-ish in a way, and it's very, very fun and engaging to watch, and so it really, really contrasts in a great way with the subject matter. Alfred Molina makes a nice appearance. It won the Best Original Screenplay Oscar award, and it fully deserved. And I really, really do recommend this movie. It might be one of those movies where you only see once, but it's a hell of a watch. So the number 7 movie on my list is our newest Best Picture winner, Nomadland. Directed by Chloe Zhao and starring Frances McDormand, Bob Wells, and Swanky. It is the story of Fern, a woman who has lost her job, her husband, and her house, and is forced into a nomadic lifestyle living out of her van. And what she does is that she goes and finds seasonal jobs. One of the nice things about this film is almost a microcosmic look of how the nomadic lifestyle has evolved out in the American West. It's almost evocative of movies like Into the Wild or Wild, both of which were based off of true stories, just like this one. One of the fascinating things about this movie is that a lot of the cast are people who are known as actual nomads. So, for example, there's a man who sets up a camp and creates this community of other nomads and people and he kind of teaches people how to live this kind of lifestyle, and they even have their own barter system set up. This man is played by Bob Wells, who is an actual nomad, and that's actually what he does in real life. And he was one of the subjects of the book Nomadland: Surviving America in the 21st Century, the book that formed the basis for this movie. One of the nice subtexts about this movie is about how it's Fern learning to live with her pain instead of just trying to outrun it. And so that it gives the movie a nice emotional center beyond just a look at a unique lifestyle. That a lot of people, unfortunately, were forced into in the aftermath of the 2008 economic recession. It's about a group of people, most of whom are older or were closer to retirement, that you don't normally see these kinds of stories told about. And so it's a nice look at that, and it's well directed. This movie looks gorgeous. Maybe I'm a sucker for landscape porn, but it's amazing. This movie won 3 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress. You'd be hard-pressed to disagree with any of those wins. My number 6 movie is a movie that also contains some of those content warnings, so once again, if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to skip ahead. It is Judas and the Black Messiah, directed by Shaka King, and starring Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, with also performances by Jesse Plemons, who is creepy in fucking every role he's ever in. I only ever see him as Todd from Breaking Bad. It's just, and Martin Sheen, and probably the most sinister performance of his career. Based on the true story of Bill O'Neill, a car thief who gets pressured by the FBI into acting as a mole against the Black Panthers, and specifically against organizer Fred Hampton, which culminates in Fred Hampton's assassination. Now, this movie is based off of a true story. So this movie is first and foremost a historical biopic, and it is a very, very bleak movie about a very bleak subject matter and a bleak time in America's history. But this movie is also acting as a sociopolitical mirror to current times. Ironically enough, this movie also has aspects of the undercover cop thriller genre, which is I don't know that too many movies of that vein have been made, at least not since The Departed. And the movie succeeds at pretty much everything it does. It's gripping, it's incredibly suspenseful, and it's not an easy, pleasant watch. But the performances in this movie are gripping. It's Daniel Kaluuya is at his most charismatic as Fred Hampton, and I really don't know that too many people could have pulled this role off. He won the Oscar for it, and it was well deserved. But I do have a quick question about that. Why were both he and Lakeith Stanfield, who stars as Bill O'Neill, why were they both in supporting actor category? You'd think at least one of them would have been put up for leading actor. I'm just saying. Director Shaka King is making his debut film with this one, and oh my god, what a mature film to debut with. This is confidently directed. It's very, very precisely directed. You can tell that he's a student of Spike Lee. There are certain fingerprints on Spike Lee movies that you notice with these movies. So, for example, there's like little cutaways to historical figures and events that Spike Lee has been using in his movies basically since the beginning. You see that here too. And so this very much comes from the school of Spike Lee. Having said that, King makes his own unique spin on things. And it's a horrifying movie, but it's so engrossing, and it's a movie that just sticks with you for days upon watching it. And I cannot recommend this movie enough. And wow, what a career that these people are going to have going forward. Everyone in the movie. And the final thing about this movie that I want to mention is that it makes me happy that a person like Fred Hampton is getting the kind of attention that he is from a movie like this, because there are so many people that you could make the argument that history just kind of forgot about, either intentionally or otherwise, who deserve to have their stories told, and Fred Hampton is very much one of those people. My number 5 movie on my list is the animated film Wolfwalkers, out of Ireland-based studio Cartoon Saloon, and is the third and final installment in what is called the Irish Folklore Trilogy, also comprised of The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. The movie is about a young girl and her father who moved from England to Ireland, with the father's job being to hunt down the wolves that have been pestering the Irish residents. In the process of doing so, the daughter, Robin, befriends a young girl who she meets out in the forest, who she discovers is a wolfwalker, someone who is human by day, but when she sleeps, becomes a wolf at night. One of the things about this movie that really caught my eyes, the animation is just gorgeous. It uses a couple of different techniques, including wood blocking and loose expressive line work. Despite the fact that there's different techniques and different styles being used at different points in the movie, it always feels seamless. And it always feels like it's enhancing whatever is going on in the film. And there are points where it's like different perspectives are being used. So there's rule of thirds shots where there are three different scenes being shown at the same time, and different characters are doing different things, but it's a very, very coherent watch, and it enhances literally everything you're seeing. Now, this movie is also subtextually about English colonization of Ireland, and so there's a lot of tension from this movie that is drawn straight out of that. The Irish residents don't really like her, the other kids won't play with her and ostracize Robin, and which is why she ends up partially why she ends up befriending this outcast in the forest. It's a nice movie about a beautiful friendship, and it's really just about a family trying to find its place in the world. And there's a lot of outside factors, including the colonization, that just won't allow that to happen for one reason or another. It's a very, very sweet movie, and it's a very, very good watch. If you can find a way to watch it, it's on Apple TV. I highly recommend it. It was my choice for animated feature. Not to say that Soul didn't deserve it or anything. It's honestly, I think it's one of the most underrated movies that have come out this year, and I cannot recommend this movie enough to everyone. It's probably the most heartwarming movie on this list. My number 4 movie is Palm Springs, which released on Hulu back in July, starring Andy Samberg, Kristen Milioti, and having a hilarious performance from J.K. Simmons. This movie is quite funny. It's really funny, but it's really endearing. It's part of that time loop sci-fi subgenre that's been developing basically since Groundhog Day came out. But really within the last 10 years, we've been seeing a lot of properties, including but not limited to Edge of Tomorrow, Happy Death Day, Russian Doll. So this is the latest in kind of a burgeoning subgenre. Now, if you're going to use a familiar premise such as the time loop subgenre, you have to have something new to say with it, and I think this movie does have something new to say with it. It uses the time loop as a metaphor for romantic relationships, feeling like you're stuck in a rut, but also for growing up in a way. Both the main characters are people who are kind of lost in one way or another, and both people who are uncomfortable at best with leaving their comfort zone. So the subtext of the movie is really about just making that leap of faith, and then if you want to do something in your life, and it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, it just is the example that this movie uses. It's like you have to leave your comfort zone if it's something you want to do. And as somebody who is pursuing a field that is incredibly difficult to get into, that is something that really, really, really resonated with me. And the movie is funny. Milioti and Samberg are both in top form. It's funny, it's endearing. J.K. Simmons is great. It's infinitely watchable.
Oh, you stink!
What? Okay, I intended that pun. Maybe it's just because it came out at the right place at the right time, but it was one of the best pleasant surprises of the year. My number 3 movie on my list is Minari, directed and written by Lee Isaac Chung and starring Steven Yeun in a career-defining performance. Featuring an Oscar-winning performance from Yoon Ye-jung, this is an endearing movie about a family who has emigrated twice now, once to California from Korea and then the second time from California to Arkansas, as they buy a farm and try to carve out their own slice of the American dream. It is a movie about a family fighting to survive. That's primarily what this movie is first and foremost about. It's a perspective that you don't see covered in a lot of mainstream media, but it's also a very universal story, which makes it so easy to connect to. And it's such a wonderful film. This film is bittersweet but heartwarming at the same time, and I really, really enjoyed myself with it. And my number 2 movie of the year is Florian Zeller's The Father, starring Anthony Hopkins and Olivia Colman as a father suffering from his dementia and his daughter's attempts to take care of him. This movie really fell under the radar for me, and frankly, the only reason I even saw it was because we were covering all the Best Picture nominees in the Return of the Movie podcast, and it was the last movie on the list that I ended up seeing, and it was something that I really just didn't know a whole lot about. And my God, this movie just blew me away. This movie is heartbreaking, but it's also terrifying. There's never been a take on this kind of topic, dementia, quite like this. There really hasn't. This movie is kind of like if Memento was about dementia, just because it uses a lot of the same techniques where you're thrown into scenes where you don't know what's happening. And so you're experiencing things as he experiences them, which is incredibly disorienting at times because you don't know what's real, you don't know what's happening, you don't know when it's happening. And it even gets to the point where multiple actors will portray the same character. And so that's to show that he's getting confused with who is whom. Mark Gatiss, for example, he'll play the daughter's boyfriend in one scene, and then he'll play a nursing home nurse in another, and you don't know which one he is. You don't know which one he's supposed to be, and it's the movie's like terrifying because there's no way to keep track of the passage of time in this movie, and it's just so engrossing because as things get worse and worse for Anthony Hopkins' character, you really, really feel for him. And there are times when this movie takes you out of that first person point of view and then switches over to Olivia Colman as the daughter. And it just shows the heartbreaking how traumatizing this is for her as well. And some of the decisions she is forced to make. And this movie, it sticks with you a long time after you stop watching it. Anthony Hopkins fully deserved his Best Actor win for this movie, as weird as the circumstances around that were. And again, that's not to say Chadwick didn't deserve it or was bad by any stretch of the imagination, but this is legitimately Anthony Hopkins' best performance since Silence of the Lambs, and maybe it's even on par with that. This was a fucking good movie. This is a movie that sticks with you long after the credits stop rolling. Now, before we get into my top movie of the year, here are some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut, but I thought were worth talking about anyways. The Assistant. It's a good, somewhat dry movie about a film intern and the sexual harassment she faces as a part of her daily routine, and that's part of the horror of that movie. Borat 2, subsequent movie film, a funny but surprisingly endearing sequel to a movie released almost 15 years ago now. The King of Staten Island, a Judd Apatow dramedy that is based primarily off of Pete Davidson's life, also starring Bill Burr at his most Bill Burr and a handlebar mustache. David Fincher's Mank features great performances from Charles Dance, Amanda Seyfried, Gary Oldman, and a kick-ass score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. My final honorable mention is I'm Thinking of Ending Things, directed by Charlie Kaufman and starring Jesse Plemons and Jessie Buckley, a creepy but haunting film that was released on Netflix back in the fall. And my personal favorite movie of the past year is Darius Marder's Sound of Metal, starring an amazing performance from Riz Ahmed and a heartbreaking performance from Olivia Cooke and a wonderful turn from Paul Raci. This movie is, as a musician, this movie is my nightmare. It is about a drummer who starts losing his hearing while they are on tour and the fallout that causes in his life as a result. This movie is a couple of things at once. It's a character study about somebody who is a drug addict chasing a life that he can no longer live and chasing that sense of loss. It's a movie about loss, really, and how to come to terms with loss and find a sort of inner peace with yourself. And so this movie uses a musician going deaf, like having his entire life stripped away from him, as a vehicle for this message. That's not to say that the deaf portions of this movie are ignored by the writer. No, this movie is a wonderful This movie is a wonderful look at the deaf community. It's a community that doesn't get all that much coverage in the mainstream media, at least not like this. And one of the more engrossing things about this movie is that, like The Father, this movie uses a lot of first-person point-of-view techniques to get the viewer to experience what Ruben himself is experiencing. So that when the sound design is one of the biggest ways, and the most notable way, and it even won an Oscar for its sound, and it fully deserved it. This is one of the best uses of sound design I've ever seen in a movie, bar none. This movie has you hear what he hears when he hears it. So when his hearing starts to go is when the mixing starts to get lower and you can't hear all that much. There are times where it sounds filtered as if you're hearing things underwater. The sound design really tells the story more than anything else in this movie. Another slightly more underrated technique that this film uses is that because he has because Ruben goes deaf, he has to start learning sign language. And he gets introduced into this deaf community led by Paul Raci. And there's a lot of people who only ever talk in sign language. And there are no subtitles given until he starts learning it. And so we start understanding more of what these people are saying as Ruben understands it and as he gets better at sign language. It was a wonderful, subtle little thing to show his journey and his progression as becoming a more complete person. Olivia Cooke stars as his supportive girlfriend, Lou, as their relationship gets pushed to the limit. One of the more heartbreaking things about this movie is that Ruben and Lou are both former drug addicts. And part of Ruben's behavior when he's trying to recover his hearing, and it's even pointed out to him, is also the behavior of a drug addict. And so part of the movie is how Ruben is constantly chasing these things that he can never have and the destructive path that leads him down. And it is heartbreaking to watch as he goes on this journey. And it's the very bitter side of bittersweet, but it is such a good movie and a rewarding watch. And it's why it was my favorite movie of the year. Thanks for sticking with me to the end on this one, guys. I had a blast making this list, and I hope you guys enjoy what I have to say. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm stupid and never should ever talk about movies on the internet ever again? Did I leave out any egregious snubs? Let me know in the comments. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. And if you want to see me and my friends talking about movies a little bit more in depth than what I'm able to here, we have the Return of the Movie podcast, where we will be covering the Saw series next in anticipation of the upcoming Spiral release. And next week on Full Stop, it's the first week of May. It's the May the 4th. So we'll be talking about something a little bit fun next week. So stick around. It's Full Stop.